The massive alien ship hung in space like a metal mountain above Earth's moon. Commander Zalara Vex stood on the bridge of her flagship, looking down at the small blue planet below. Her purple skin gleamed under the bridge lights, and her four arms moved with practiced grace as she reviewed the reports from her officers. The humans had built impressive cities and had some interesting technology, but they were still primitive. Compared to her people, the Zephyrian Zalara had conquered 47 worlds in her career, and Earth would be number 48. She had seen species far more advanced than these humans surrender without a fight once they saw the size of her fleet. 300 warships surrounded Earth now, and more were coming through the jump gates every hour. The show of force usually worked, and she expected the humans to give up soon. Her communication officer turned toward her, with his scaled head tilted in confusion. "Commander, the humans are requesting a meeting aboard our flagship. They say they want to negotiate terms." Zalara laughed with a sound like crystal breaking. "Negotiate? What could they possibly offer us that we cannot simply take? But very well. Let them come. It will be amusing to see them beg." 2 hours later, Captain Jake Morrison and Lieutenant Amy Carter materialized on the transport pad of the Zephyrian flagship. Morrison was a tall man with graying hair and calm eyes that took in everything around him. Carter was younger, with short brown hair, and carried a small device that she claimed was a universal translator, though the Zephyrians had already provided translation services. Zalara met them in her command chamber, which was designed to intimidate visitors. The room was enormous, with a ceiling that stretched up into darkness. Holographic displays showed the positions of her fleet around Earth and tactical data about human defenses. She sat on a throne-like chair that towered above the humans, making them look even smaller than they already were. "So you have come to surrender your world," Zalara said, looking down at the two humans. "I am pleased that you recognize the hopelessness of resistance. The terms are simple. Your species will serve mine. You will provide workers for our colonies and soldiers for our armies. Your technology will become ours, and your leaders will obey our governors." Morrison stepped forward, and his voice was steady when he spoke. "We did not come here to surrender, Commander Vex. We came to offer you a challenge." The silence in the room was complete. Zalara's officers looked at each other in shock. No species had ever challenged the Zephyrians in living memory. They conquered through superior technology and overwhelming force. The idea that these primitive humans would dare to challenge them was beyond belief. Zalara's laugh echoed through the chamber. "A challenge? You amuse me, human. What sort of challenge could your pathetic species possibly offer mine?" Morrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. "This contains a complete record of Zephyrian law and customs that we obtained from your previous conquests. According to the ancient code called the Cathari Pact, any species facing conquest has the right to challenge their conquerors to trials of worthiness." Zalara's amusement faded as she listened. The Cathari Pact was indeed ancient law, dating back to the early days of Zephyrian expansion. It had been created by her ancestors, who believed that worthy species should have a chance to prove themselves rather than simply be destroyed. Of course, no species had ever actually won such a challenge because the Zephyrians were superior in every way that mattered. "The law requires 3 trials," Morrison continued. "Combat to test physical prowess, strategy to test mental capability, and intelligence to test pure reasoning ability. If the challenging species wins even one trial, they earn their freedom and the right to remain independent." Amy Carter stepped forward and activated her device. A holographic display appeared, showing the relevant sections of Zephyrian law in both languages. "The pact is binding under your honor code, Commander. Once accepted, it cannot be withdrawn or modified." Zalara studied the display and confirmed that the humans had indeed found a legitimate legal challenge. She could refuse, but doing so would mark her as a coward in the eyes of her own people. The Zephyrian honor code was absolute, and she had built her entire career on following it perfectly. More importantly, she saw no real risk in accepting the Zephyrians had evolved beyond the limitations that held back primitive species like humans. Their warriors were genetically enhanced and trained from birth. Their strategists had conquered dozens of star systems. Their scholars had unlocked the secrets of the universe itself. No human could possibly match Zephyrian superiority in any field. You seek to delay the inevitable through legal trickery, Zalara said, standing from her throne. But I will indulge your foolishness. I accept your challenge under the Cathari Pact. When you fail in all 3 trials, your species will serve mine with even greater humility for having dared to waste my time. Morrison nodded gravely. The trials will be conducted according to ancient custom, with neutral judges and equal conditions for both sides. Each trial will test our finest against yours, with no technological advantages permitted. Agreed, said, waving one of her hands dismissively. We will begin with combat, since that is where your defeat will be most obvious. I will select my finest warrior, and you will provide whatever champion you think might last more than a few minutes against superior Zephyrian might. As the humans were escorted back to their transport, Zalara felt a deep satisfaction. She had conquered worlds through pure military might, but this would be different. This would be a demonstration of Zephyrian superiority that would echo through the galaxy. Other species would learn that even their ancient laws and customs could not save them from the inevitable reality of Zephyrian dominance. She called her officers together to plan the trials. The combat trial would be held in the ship's main arena, with full holographic recording for posterity. The strategy trial would use their most advanced tactical The intelligence trial would test pure reasoning ability using problems that had challenged the greatest Zephyrian minds. Zalara looked forward to watching human dreams die one trial at a time. She had no way of knowing that her arrogance would soon trap her in chains of her own making. The arena aboard the Zephyrian flagship was a marvel of technology that could create any environment imaginable. Holographic projectors lined the walls and floor, creating landscapes so real that visitors often forgot they were inside a spaceship. Today the arena would host the first trial between species, and Zalara had chosen the setting carefully. Sergeant Ben Hay stood quietly in the human preparation area, checking his equipment one final time. He was not an impressive man to look at, with his medium height and ordinary features. His brown hair was cut short in military style, and his hands showed the calluses of someone who had worked with weapons and tools his entire life. General Lisa Park stood beside him, reviewing the trial conditions on her portable display. Remember, Ben, this is not about winning through strength, General Park said quietly. Study your opponent and find his weaknesses. Every species has patterns and blind spots, even the Zephyrians. Ben nodded and continued his equipment check. He had fought in conflicts across human space for 15 years, and had learned that the strongest warrior did not always win. Sometimes the smartest warrior won, instead. Across the arena, in the Zephyrian preparation area, Corvin the Destroyer prepared for what he expected to be an easy victory. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, with muscles enhanced by genetic modification and chemical treatments. His 4 arms could wield multiple weapons simultaneously, and his reflexes were faster than any natural creature. Scars covered his purple skin from dozens of battles, and his yellow eyes burned with predatory hunger. Corvin had never been defeated in combat. He had fought the greatest warriors from dozens of species and crushed them all. The thought that this small human might provide any real challenge was laughable. He would end the fight quickly and brutally to demonstrate Zephyrian superiority to the galaxy. Commander Zalara entered the arena with her senior officers and took her place in the observation deck, the arena filled with Zephyrian spectators who had come to watch their champion destroy the human fool. Recording devices captured every angle for transmission to the Zephyrian fleet, and eventually to conquered worlds throughout their empire. The first trial will consist of 3 phases, announced the arena controller. ranged combat using standard energy weapons, close combat using melee weapons, and survival combat in a hostile environment. Victory in 2 of 3 phases determines the winner. The arena transformed into a rocky landscape with scattered boulders and metal barriers. Both fighters received identical energy rifles with unlimited ammunition. The rules were simple: eliminate your opponent or force their surrender within 10 minutes. The combat began immediately, as Corvin charged forward, firing rapid bursts from his rifle. His forearms allowed him to fire while running and changing direction in ways that would be impossible for a 2-armed creature. Ben dove behind a boulder as energy blasts scorched the ground around him. Corvin moved like a force of nature, using his superior speed and reflexes to advance, while maintaining constant fire. Ben retreated from cover to cover, trying to find an angle for return fire, but the Zephyrian warrior anticipated every move. Within minutes, Ben was pinned behind a small barrier with Corvin, closing in for the kill. The crowd of Zephyrians cheered as their champion demonstrated his dominance. Zalara smiled with satisfaction as she watched the human cower behind inadequate cover. This was proceeding exactly as she had expected. Ben waited until Corvin was almost close enough to touch, then suddenly rolled sideways and fired 3 precise shots. The energy blasts struck Corvin in the chest and shoulder, but his enhanced physiology absorbed the damage with minimal effect. Corvin roared with laughter and fired a devastating burst that shattered Ben's cover completely. First phase to Corvin, the Destroyer, announced the arena controller as medics attended to Ben's minor injuries. The arena reconfigured for close combat with a circular fighting pit surrounded by weapon racks. Both fighters could choose from swords, knives, spears, and other traditional weapons. Corvin selected a massive 2-handed sword in his primary arms and a pair of combat knives in his secondary arms. Ben chose a simple combat knife and a short sword. The close combat phase was even more one-sided than ranged combat. Corvin's reach and strength advantages were overwhelming as he drove Ben backward with a series of devastating attacks. His four-armed fighting style created a constant barrage of strikes that Ben could barely deflect, let alone counter. Blood flowed from several cuts on Ben's arms and legs as Corvin pressed his attack. The Zephyrian crowd roared with approval as their champion displayed his martial prowess. Ben's defense grew more desperate as fatigue set in, and Corvin's superior endurance became apparent. The end came suddenly as Corvin feinted with his sword, then drove both knives toward Ben's chest. Ben managed to deflect one knife, but the other found its mark, drawing blood and forcing his surrender before serious injury occurred. Second phase to Corvin the Destroyer, the arena controller announced. Final phase will determine the trial winner. Zalara leaned forward in her seat as the arena transformed one final time. The survival phase would surely end any hope that humans might have harbored. Corvin had dominated both previous phases and would certainly finish his opponent in an environment that tested pure survival instinct. The arena became a harsh wilderness with dense forest, rocky cliffs, and hidden dangers. Both fighters were given basic survival gear and told that victory went to whoever eliminated their opponent or forced surrender within 1 hour. Technology was forbidden, and only natural materials could be used as weapons or tools. Corvin immediately began hunting for his opponent, crashing through the forest with confidence born of genetic superiority. His enhanced senses could track the human easily, and his strength would allow him to create weapons from trees and rocks. He expected to find Ben cowering somewhere and end this farce quickly. Ben had vanished into the forest like smoke, using skills learned in special operations training on a dozen different worlds. He moved silently through the undergrowth, studying the terrain and his opponent's behavior. For the first time in the trial, he was fighting on ground where his experience mattered more than raw physical capability. Corvin's arrogance worked against him as he made no attempt at stealth. Ben tracked the Zephyrian warrior's progress easily while setting up a series of traps and ambush points. Patience was something humans had learned through thousands of years of hunting and warfare. Corvin had learned only to rely on superior strength. The first trap was a simple deadfall that caught Corvin's leg as he passed under a rocky overhang. The injury was minor, but it made the Zephyrian warrior more cautious and slowed his pursuit. The second trap was a concealed pit lined with sharpened stakes that forced Corvin to take a longer route around a cliff face. Ben used every trick he had learned in 15 years of combat to turn the environment against his opponent. He started small fires to create smoke screens. He diverted a stream to create muddy ground that slowed Corvin's movement. He used sound and shadow to create false targets that drew the warrior away from his actual position. The final confrontation came when Corvin cornered Ben against a cliff face after an hour of frustrating pursuit. The Zephyrian warrior charged forward, confident that superior strength would end the trial. Ben waited until the last moment, then triggered his final trap. The cliff face collapsed in a carefully planned avalanche that buried Corvin under tons of rock and debris. The Zephyrian warrior survived due to his enhanced physiology, but was trapped and forced to surrender when rescue became impossible within the time limit. The arena fell silent as the impossible happened. A human had defeated the greatest Zephyrian warrior through cunning and environmental awareness. Zalera stared in shock as the trial results were announced. Her perfect record of conquest had suffered its first crack. Commander Zalera Vex had not slept since the first trial ended 3 days ago. She paced her private quarters aboard the flagship, reviewing tactical reports and questioning everything. She thought she knew about human capabilities. The loss of Corvin should have been impossible, but the recording devices had captured every moment of the humans' unlikely victory. The strategic simulation chamber was the most advanced training facility in the Zephyrian fleet. Holographic displays covered every surface, creating a three-dimensional battlefield that responded to mental commands. Zalera had trained here for decades, perfecting the tactics that had conquered 47 worlds. Today she would personally command the Zephyrian forces to ensure no repeat of the previous humiliation. Captain Jake Morrison entered the chamber with Professor Dan Clark and Admiral Kate Ross. The three humans looked small and insignificant compared to the massive displays showing star systems and fleet movements. Morrison carried a simple tablet computer while his companions studied the chamber's capabilities with obvious interest. "This simulation will test pure strategic thinking," Zalera announced to the assembled observers. "Both sides command equal fleets in a contested star system. Victory requires controlling key strategic points while eliminating enemy forces. Technology levels are matched, so superior tactics will determine the winner." The simulation began with both fleets positioned at opposite edges of a star system containing 12 planets and numerous asteroid fields. Each side commanded 100 warships of various classes, plus support vessels and defensive installations. Resource collection and fleet construction were possible using captured territory and mining operations. Zalera immediately implemented standard Zephyrian tactics that had proven successful across the galaxy. She concentrated her heaviest ships into a main battle fleet and drove straight toward the most valuable strategic targets. Her secondary forces spread out to capture resource points, while her scouts gathered intelligence on human movements. The human fleet response seemed chaotic and undisciplined compared to Zephyrian precision. Their ships scattered in seemingly random directions with no apparent coordination or strategic purpose. Morrison divided his forces into small groups that wandered aimlessly through the outer system while ignoring the obvious strategic objectives. "Typical human behavior," Zalera muttered as she watched the displays. "No discipline or strategic thinking. They react emotionally instead of following logical tactical doctrine." Within 2 hours, Zalera had captured 3 major planets and established a dominant position in the inner system. Her concentrated battle fleet smashed through scattered human forces that seemed incapable of coordinating an effective defense. Victory appeared inevitable as Zephyrian superiority asserted itself once again. Professor Clark whispered something to Morrison, who nodded and made several adjustments to their fleet positioning. The scattered human forces began moving in patterns that made even less sense than before. Some ships retreated from battles they could have won, while others charged into obviously hopeless situations. Zalera pressed her advantage by launching simultaneous attacks on multiple fronts. Her superior numbers and coordination should have ended the simulation quickly, but something strange began happening. Human ships that appeared to be fleeing in panic suddenly turned and struck at unexpected targets. Retreat became attack, and defeat became ambush with bewildering speed. The first sign of real trouble came when Zalara's main supply convoy was destroyed by a small, human force that had seemed to be running away. Her heavy battle fleet found itself cut off from reinforcement and resupply just as human attacks intensified across the entire system. What had looked like random movement was revealed as careful positioning for coordinated strikes. Admiral Ross took control of one sector and began demonstrating tactics that Zalera had never encountered. Human ships worked in small groups that supported each other in fluid combinations. When attacked, they scattered only to regroup at unexpected angles. When pursuing, they moved like a pack of hunters driving prey toward hidden ambushes. Impossible, Zalera said, as her carefully planned offensive began to collapse. They have no coordination, no strategic thinking. How are they achieving these results? Morrison smiled grimly as he watched Zephyrian formations break apart under pressure from attacks that came from every direction except where expected. We studied your tactics for 3 days, Commander. You fight like a machine following programmed responses. Change the conditions, and the machine breaks down. The tide of battle turned completely as human forces revealed the true nature of their strategy. Every seemingly random movement had been calculated to position ships for maximum effect at the critical moment. Every retreat had drawn Zephyrian forces into vulnerable positions. Every scattered group had been part of a larger pattern. Invisible until activation, Zalera found herself fighting an enemy that refused to behave according to established military doctrine. Human ships appeared where they should not be, and attacked targets that made no tactical sense until the larger pattern became clear. Her own forces became predictable as they followed standard responses to unexpected situations. The simulations climax came when Morrison launched his final coordinated assault. Human forces that had been scattered across the system suddenly converged on Zalara's remaining strongholds with perfect timing. Ships emerged from asteroid fields where they had been hiding for hours. Forces that appeared to be retreating suddenly reversed course to attack from behind. Zalera watched in growing horror as her superior fleet was systematically destroyed by tactics she could not understand or counter. The humans fought like nothing she had ever encountered, using their own weaknesses as weapons and turning Zephyrian strengths against themselves. Her disciplined formations became rigid targets, while human chaos revealed itself as calculated flexibility. Final score: humans 67, Zephyrians 33, announced the simulation computer as the last of Zalara's forces were eliminated. Human victory achieved through superior tactical innovation and adaptive strategy. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Not only had the humans won, but they had done so decisively against the most accomplished military commander in the Zephyrian fleet. Zalara stared at the tactical displays, trying to understand how her certainty of victory had become such complete defeat. Morrison approached the commander's position with his tablet, showing detailed analysis of the battle. Your tactics are excellent, Commander, but they assume your enemy will fight the same way you do. When we changed the rules, you could not adapt quickly enough to counter our response. You fight without honor or discipline, Zalara said, though her voice lacked conviction. Your movements were random and chaotic, with no strategic coherence. Admiral Ross stepped forward with her own analysis displayed on the chamber screens. Every movement was planned 3 steps ahead, Commander. We used apparent chaos to mask our real intentions while your ordered formations telegraphed your moves, hours in advance. You fought against what you expected to see, instead of what was actually happening. Professor Clark activated a holographic replay showing the battle from the human perspective. The scattered movements that had seemed random revealed themselves as carefully coordinated positioning for a complex ambush spanning the entire star system. What looked like defeat and retreat was actually preparation for a devastating counterattack. Studied the replay and began to understand the scope of her miscalculation. The humans had not simply outfought her, they had demonstrated a completely different approach to warfare that made traditional Zephyrian tactics obsolete. They had turned their apparent disadvantages into strategic weapons while using her strengths against her. 2 trials remain, Morrison said quietly. But regardless of the final outcome, you should know that humanity will never surrender to conquerors who refuse to see us as we really are. As the observers filed out of the simulation chamber, Zalera remained alone, staring at the tactical displays. For the first time in her career, she faced the possibility that Zephyrian superiority might be nothing more than assumption and arrogance. The humans had already proven that strength and intelligence alone were not enough to guarantee victory. The thought terrified her more than any enemy fleet ever could. The intelligence testing facility aboard the Zephyrian flagship contained the most advanced cognitive assessment equipment in known space. Holographic displays surrounded comfortable seating areas where test subjects could work on problems that challenged the greatest minds in the galaxy. Commander Zalera Vex stood before the main display, reviewing the test protocols with growing desperation. She had selected Scholar Prime Kethan as her champion for this final trial. Kethan was the most brilliant intellect in the Zephyrian fleet, with enhanced neural pathways that could process information at superhuman speeds. His achievements in mathematics, physics, and xenobiology had advanced Zephyrian science by centuries. If anyone could defeat the humans in pure intellectual competition, it would be him. Dr. Emma Foster entered the testing chamber with young Alex Turner walking beside her. Foster was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes that missed nothing around her. Turner was barely 20 years old, with an eager expression and nervous energy that made him seem younger still. Neither looked like they could challenge the greatest mind the Zephyrians had produced. The final trial tests pure reasoning ability, Zalera announced to the gathered observers. Both teams will face increasingly complex problems in mathematics, logic, and abstract analysis. Technology may be used only for display purposes, with all calculations performed mentally. The team that solves the most problems correctly wins the trial and determines the fate of both species. Kethan took his position at the Zephyrian testing station with confidence born of intellectual superiority. His elongated skull housed a brain enhanced through genetic modification and cybernetic implants. Neural interfaces connected him directly to the ship's computers for data storage and retrieval, though actual problem solving had to be done through pure thought processes. The first series of problems involved complex mathematical sequences that would challenge university professors on most worlds. Kethan solved them effortlessly, with calculations that appeared on his display screen almost instantly. His enhanced mind processed numbers and formulas faster than most beings could read them. Foster and Turner worked together at the human station, with Turner handling pure mathematics, while Foster focused on pattern recognition and logical analysis. They solved the early problems correctly, but much more slowly than their Zephyrian opponent. The gap in processing speed seemed insurmountable as Kethan pulled further ahead with each completed solution. The second series tested knowledge of physics and chemistry through problems involving molecular structures, quantum mechanics, and energy field interactions. Kethan's vast database of scientific knowledge allowed him to identify solutions immediately while cross-referencing multiple theoretical frameworks simultaneously. The human team struggled with these advanced scientific concepts, though Foster's background in xenobiology helped her recognize some of the molecular patterns. Turner contributed creative insights that occasionally led to correct answers through unconventional reasoning paths. However, they fell further behind, as Catherine demonstrated the perceived superiority of enhanced intelligence over natural human limitations. Zell began to relax as she watched her champion dominate the intellectual competition. This was what she had expected from the beginning, with Cephrean mental superiority asserting itself over primitive human thinking. The previous two trials had been flukes caused by unusual circumstances that would never be repeated. The third series of problems shifted toward creative and abstract thinking, with challenges that required intuitive leaps rather than pure computational power. Test subjects had to solve puzzles involving artistic interpretation, cultural analysis, and symbolic reasoning that could not be reduced to simple algorithms. For the first time, Kethin began to slow down as he encountered problems that his enhanced intellect could not solve through brute force calculation. His mind was designed for logical analysis and data processing, but struggled with questions that had no clear mathematical solutions. He approached each abstract problem systematically, trying to reduce it to quantifiable elements. Foster and Turner began to close the gap as they tackled problems that played to human strengths in pattern recognition and creative synthesis. Foster's experience with alien cultures helped her understand symbolic representations, while Turner's young mind made intuitive connections that bypassed traditional logical frameworks entirely. The testing chamber grew quiet as both teams worked on increasingly challenging abstract problems. Mathematical precision gave way to artistic interpretation, and logical analysis yielded to creative insight. The intellectual battlefield had shifted to territory where human minds could compete despite their technological disadvantages. The final challenge involved a complex xenoarchaeological puzzle discovered in the ruins of an extinct civilization. Teams had to decode a mathematical linguistic system that combined numerical patterns with cultural symbols and artistic elements. The civilization had embedded their entire philosophical framework into a single complex equation that required both analytical and intuitive understanding. Kethin approached the puzzle with his usual systematic methodology, breaking down each symbol and number into component parts for analysis. His enhanced mind cataloged thousands of possible interpretations and tested them against mathematical principles and linguistic patterns. However, the puzzle resisted pure logical analysis because it incorporated elements that could not be quantified. Foster studied the alien symbols with the eye of someone who had spent decades analyzing foreign cultures and biological systems. She recognized that the mathematical elements were inseparable from the artistic and cultural components, creating a unified system that had to be understood holistically rather than through reductive analysis. Turner looked at the puzzle with fresh eyes, unconstrained by traditional academic approaches to problem solving. He saw patterns that connected mathematics to music, art to science and culture, to logic in ways that created a single integrated message from the extinct civilization. His young mind made leaps that bridged gaps between different types of knowledge. Working together, Foster and Turner began to decode the puzzle, not as a mathematical problem, but as a story told through numbers and symbols. The extinct civilization had created a narrative about their understanding of existence itself, woven into a format that required both logical and creative interpretation to fully comprehend. "They are not trying to solve an equation," Foster said quietly to Turner. "They are trying to understand a poem written in mathematical language. Look at how the cultural symbols modify the numerical relationships, creating emotional resonance alongside logical structure." Turner nodded with growing excitement as the pattern became clear. The mathematics describes their scientific understanding, but the artistic elements show how they felt about those discoveries. You cannot separate the logical from the emotional because they are part of the same unified truth. Their solution emerged as a synthesis of analytical and intuitive understanding that revealed the extinct Civilizations attempt to express the unity of all knowledge through a single complex symbol system. The puzzle was not meant to be solved through pure logic, but experienced as a complete philosophical statement about the nature of existence. Kethen continued his systematic analysis, making steady progress through brute computational force, but missing the deeper patterns that required creative insight to recognize. His enhanced mind was too focused on individual elements to perceive the unified whole that gave the puzzle its true meaning. Time limit reached, announced the testing facility computer. Human team solution, complete and correct. Zephyrian team solution, incomplete, though partially accurate. Final trial victory awarded to humanity. The testing chamber fell silent as the impossible became reality. The humans had not only won the final trial, but had demonstrated a form of intelligence that Zephyrian enhancement could not replicate. They had succeeded through integration of logical and creative thinking rather than pure computational superiority. Zalera stared at the results display, unable to comprehend how her most brilliant scholar had been defeated by two humans working with unenhanced biological brains. The implications were staggering because they suggested that Zephyrian assumptions about intelligence itself might be fundamentally flawed. Kethen examined the human solution with growing amazement as he realized the elegance and depth of their approach. They had not simply solved the puzzle, but had understood it in ways that his enhanced mind could not achieve. Their victory represented a form of thinking that transcended mere computational ability. The Cathari Pact was complete, and humanity had won all three trials through demonstrations of capabilities that Zephyrian superiority could not match or understand. Zalera faced the unthinkable reality that her career of conquest was about to end in the most humiliating defeat possible. The main conference chamber aboard the Zephyrian flagship had never hosted a meeting like this one. Commander Zalera Vex sat at the head of the massive table staring at legal documents that would change her life forever. Captain Jake Morrison sat across from her with President Maria Santos, who had arrived from Earth to witness the formal conclusion of the Cathari Pact. 3 days had passed since the final trial ended, and Zalera had spent every hour studying ancient Zephyrian law, trying to find some escape from the consequences of her arrogance. The legal scholars she consulted confirmed her worst fears. The Cathari Pact was binding under the most sacred traditions of her people, and violation would destroy her honor forever. The terms are clear, Commander, Morrison said gently. Humanity has won all three trials, and earned our freedom under your own laws. Your fleet must withdraw from Earth's space, and never return with hostile intent. Zalera nodded slowly, though the words felt like poison in her throat. The withdrawal will begin immediately, Captain Morrison. My ships will be beyond your solar system within 48 hours, and the Zephyrian Empire will recognize Earth's independence in perpetuity. President Santos leaned forward with interest in her dark eyes. That seems almost too simple after everything that has happened, Commander. Surely there must be additional consequences for a challenge of this magnitude. The question Zalera had been dreading finally came. She reached for another legal document with hands that trembled slightly. As she placed it on the table, the ancient text was written in ceremonial Zephyrian script that few beings in the galaxy could read, but translation devices made its meaning clear to everyone present. The Cathari Pact contains provisions that I did not fully consider when I accepted your challenge, Zalera said quietly. The commander who issues such a challenge becomes personally bound to serve the victorious species as military advisor and cultural liaison for the remainder of their natural life. The silence in the chamber was complete as the implications became clear. Morrison studied the legal document carefully, while President Santos examined the translation with growing amazement. The proud commander who had come to conquer Earth was now legally obligated to serve humanity until her death. This cannot be correct, Admiral Kate Ross said as she entered the chamber with her legal staff. No civilization would create laws that could trap their own commanders in permanent servitude to enemy species. Solara's bitter laugh echoed through the chamber. The Cathari Pact was created by my ancestors who believed that worthy species deserved respect and integration rather than simple conquest. They never imagined that a commander would be foolish enough to challenge a species capable of victory through methods our people could not understand or counter. She stood and walked to the massive viewport that showed Earth hanging in space like a blue jewel. Her reflection in the transparent material looked older than it had just a week ago, when she had arrived with such confidence in Zephyrian superiority. The law exists to prevent commanders from issuing challenges carelessly, Solara continued. It ensures that only those willing to stake their personal freedom will invoke the ancient rights. My arrogance has made me a servant to the species I came here to conquer. Morrison joined her at the viewport, and his voice was surprisingly compassionate when he spoke. Commander, we never wanted to trap you in unwilling servitude. Surely there must be some way to modify the terms, or find an honorable alternative that satisfies both sides. Solara turned to face him with something that might have been gratitude in her alien features. You show more mercy than I deserve, Captain Morrison, but Zephyrian honor code is absolute. I gave my word under sacred law, and I will fulfill my obligations, regardless of personal cost. To do otherwise would destroy everything I have ever claimed to represent. President Santos stood and approached the two of them with a thoughtful expression. Then we must find a way to make this arrangement beneficial for everyone involved, Commander Vex. Humanity needs guides. As we take our place in galactic civilization, and you possess knowledge that could help us avoid the mistakes that other species have made. The next several hours were spent working out the practical details of Zalara's new role. She would serve as Earth's primary military advisor, helping to design defenses against potential alien threats. Her knowledge of galactic politics and alien psychology would guide human diplomacy as they established relationships with other species. Most importantly, she would help humanity understand the complex web of laws, traditions, and customs that governed interstellar civilization. There is something else you should know, Solara said as the formal agreements were signed. News of your victory will spread throughout the galaxy within weeks. Other species will learn that humanity defeated the Zephyrians through capabilities we never knew existed. Your reputation as a formidable people will precede you wherever you go. She activated a holographic display showing trade routes and communication networks that connected hundreds of star systems. The Zephyrian Empire controls much of this territory, but there are dozens of independent species and several other major powers. Your victory has changed the balance of power in ways that will take years to fully understand. Morrison studied the galactic map with interest, while President Santos took notes on her personal device. Are we likely to face other challenges, or hostile contact from species who see us as a threat? Zalara's expression grew serious as she considered the question. Some species will fear you because you represent unknown capabilities that could threaten their own security. Others will seek alliance because you have proven yourselves capable of defeating supposedly superior enemies. A few will test you directly to measure your true strength and determine whether your victory was luck or genuine ability. She highlighted several star systems on the display. These are the most likely sources of future contact, both friendly and hostile. I recommend establishing monitoring stations and defensive preparations, while sending diplomatic missions to species most likely to accept peaceful relationships. Over the following days, as the Zephyrian fleet prepared for departure, Zalara found herself working closely with human military and political leaders. Her initial resentment at being trapped in servitude gradually gave way to grudging respect for human adaptability and problem-solving abilities. The humans approached galactic integration with the same creative thinking that had won them victory in the trials. Instead of trying to copy alien technologies and tactics, they focused on developing uniquely human approaches that turned their apparent weaknesses into advantages. You continue to surprise me, Zalara told Morrison as they reviewed preliminary defense plans. Most species try to become more like their conquerors after liberation. You are becoming more distinctly human while learning to operate in an alien environment. Morrison smiled with the quiet confidence that had first impressed her during their initial meeting. We learned long ago that our greatest strength comes from being ourselves, rather than trying to imitate others. That lesson applies to galactic politics just as much as it applied to your trials. As the last Zephyrian transport departed Earth's space, Zalara stood in the command center of humanity's new orbital defense station, watching her former fleet disappear into hyperspace. She was no longer Commander Zalara Vex of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. She was now Senior Advisor, Zalara, serving a species she had underestimated so completely that her arrogance had trapped her in bonds she could never break. The irony was perfect and inescapable. Her certainty of human weakness had made her their permanent servant, while her assumptions about Zephyrian superiority had been shattered by creatures she had dismissed as primitive. The galaxy would soon learn that humanity represented something entirely new in interstellar relations. A species that grew stronger through adversity and more dangerous when underestimated. Zelara's transmission to the Zephyrian High Command would warn them that humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered, but she suspected the warning would be ignored, just as she had ignored the evidence of human capabilities. Arrogance was a difficult lesson to learn, and the price of that education was often higher than anyone expected to pay.